Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at my Oncidium Cherry Baby and share with you the story behind this orchid's bloom development, as well as one thing that I discovered from all the bloom cycles from 2018, 2 flower cycles, and another flower cycle at the beginning of 2019. This orchid was only $5 when I bought it because it was already out of bloom. I did use water culture on this orchid for quite some time when I was living in New York, but it didn't really do all that well. And after I put it into semi-hydro setup, it just took off and grew so many roots and so many pseudobulbs. So if we go back in time, 2018, mid-September, it flowered for the very first time last year in 2018, and at the time, mid-October, there was another spike developing. And today we're actually going to look at the flower from this particular spike. And at that time, that spike was also trying to create a couple branches, but for some reason they never really mature, so only the buds from the main flower spike continue to grow to become mature enough to bloom. And so if we look at the picture now, 2018, end of October, that's when the first flower started to bloom. If you're a very experienced orchid grower, orchid hobbyist, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with Oncidium Cherry Baby. But if you're new to this orchid hobby, Oncidium Cherry Baby is a very famous orchid because of its chocolate fragrance. And when I smell my own Cherry Baby, in addition to the chocolate smell, it's almost like milk chocolate because it's really sweet, but then it's also very milky chocolate, chocolatey smell. So some people also call it chocolate Oncidium. In fact, in Taiwan, people do call it chocolate Oncidium. And another thing about Oncidium orchid in general is it is just a very easy orchid to grow. I mean, there are some Oncidiums that are slightly more difficult, but for most Oncidium orchids, it's actually a very good beginner orchid type to grow if you're new to this orchid hobby. In a way, they're somewhat forgiving because this kind of orchid, unless it's absolutely stressed out or completely malnutritioned, otherwise when the time is right, whenever that time of the year that they need to bloom, they would at least give you some bloom. Obviously, with better care, better fertilization, they may have more spikes and more flowers for you. But I've noticed that even if you don't take really good care of Oncidium orchids, usually when the time is right, they still shoot out spikes and give you at least some buds, some flowers. So in a way, they're forgiving and rewarding, but if you do provide the right care, they can bloom so much. They can bloom so many flowers for you. Another thing about Oncidium orchid is that their roots are a lot thinner and skinnier if you compare the roots of Oncidiums to roots of, say, Phalaenopsis orchid or Cattleya orchids. So it's best that you keep your Oncidium orchid roots in containers that's always somewhat moist. Yes, it can have completely dry day or days, but only a couple of days, not for an extended period of time. But for for Phalaenopsis orchid or Cattleya orchids, you know, they can't tolerate for a longer period of dryness. No problem. But for Oncidiums, it's important to keep the roots moist. Obviously, sometimes if you have Oncidiums in full water culture, and if you just keep them in water for too long, sometimes the roots may rot. But if you have that wet dry cycle, just make sure that the dry days aren't, more than say 3-5 days. A couple of days, 1-2 days, it's not going to be a big deal. And in fact, that's probably good, because if you keep it too moist, sometimes between pseudobulbs, the tissues between pseudobulbs may get too wet, and they do have that rotty smell and look to it, which I don't like. This Oncidium Sherry Baby is a regular Oncidium size orchid. That means that it's much taller, and unlike Oncidium Twinkles, which is a miniature, this kind of orchid does take up a little bit more space in terms of height as well as horizontal space. So if you look at this picture now, beginning of December 2018, that's when this flower spike fully opened. And in a couple weeks later, end of December 2018, I quickly discovered that there was another spike with buds ready to open. And that just shows you that after the last flower spike was done, I thought this orchid was ready to go into like a rest period where it's just gonna have to continue to grow new pseudobulb in order to bloom more. But surprisingly, it was growing another short spike with 3 buds. So now after the last flower spike, I probably didn't look at this orchid at all, other than providing some water when it was time. So there quickly came January 2019. The buds were ready to open, and it is this particular bloom cycle that helped me discover one thing about the flowers that this orchid has had twice from 2018 in this particular bloom cycle. All 3 bloom cycles, the flowers all look slightly different. And so in the later portion of this video, I'm going to use some photos from each bloom cycle, September, November, and then early January 2019, to help you take a look at the differences between the flowers, how they look from each bloom cycle, because I am having an assumption about why the flowers look quite different from each bloom cycle. But I do want to give a disclaimer here. This is purely my own assumption, so please take it as a grain of salt if you don't agree with my assumption. And for those of you who are more interested in learning more about this topic, please do more research online, as I'm sure many more experienced orchid hobbyists will share such information too. Okay, here we go. This is the bloom from September 2018. That's my summertime here. And if you look at the skirt area, it's a lot of white area with a pink dot in the middle. November 2018, the skirt area is more pink, has more pink and less white area. And January 2019, and that's my winter time here, the skirt area almost had, I guess, more than 50% that's pink, and then only very little tiny white space. In case you want to look at these photos again to better tell the differences, let's look at those photos once again. I did not change my care for this orchid at all in terms of watering, fertilizer, in everything. Even where it's placed on my growing rack, it's all the same. Maybe a couple inches here and there that's different, but everything else was the same. So the only thing that I could think of that's different is season and or temperature. So as the temperature dropped, for some reason that caused the flower to bloom in a more saturated color. And I've also observed similar behavior for my other orchids when they bloom with more intense color when the temperature is cooler. Anyway, so it's an interesting observation I had, and I want to share that with you. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!